we need to build the capacity as humans to bring ourselves back to center, to emotionally regulate, to find psychological homeostasis. You can say it a whole bunch of different ways. Because the world right now, or I would say kind of the attention economy or the persuasion economy, is out to trigger you, right? And it is important to kind of understand and untangle sort of the adaptive qualities of stress. Like if you're walking, taking a hike in the trails, and you come across a rattlesnake on the path, that involuntary bottom-up stress response is incredibly adaptive, right? You know it when you feel it. Your heart rate and respiratory rate start to increase. Your liver titrates just the right amount of glucose out. It gets sent to your extremities to fight or flee, right? The aperture of your attention becomes very narrow. Maybe your pupils dilate, etc. And then, the rattlesnake realizes that, oh, well, Kelly is not going to be on the specials menu today, whatever, like just slithers off into the high grasses. And what happens, Kelly bounces back to her parasympathetic state, right? Her heart rate and respiratory rate decrease, etc. The problem with modern society is that for so many people, metaphorically, the rattlesnake never leaves the path. So then we actually need to develop emotional regulatory techniques in order to move ourselves back to center. And there are many available to us. I mean, the most obvious ones are kind of breath work and meditation. Breath is sort of a kind of direct conduit. It's something that can be voluntarily controlled to actually influence the involuntary. So it's sort of a window or a conduit into what is happening under the crust of consciousness. So yeah, there's certainly many breathwork techniques. I will not mimic them here. But there's other ones that might be more surprising in some ways. Like crying, actually discovered, is an emotional regulatory technique that we often sort of vilify. Mm-hmm. And, you're just weak. What is this sanctimony here, crying? But when you actually are shedding emotional tears, if you were to take those emotional tears and put them in a chemistry laboratory, you'd actually find stress hormones in there. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, I think, ACTH. So when you're crying, you're literally flushing stress out of your body. Wow. There's also other physiological processes associated with crying. Generally, crying makes you go, makes you take a deep breath. Yeah. And we know that is emotionally regulatory. It's funny when you actually study how other animals emotionally regulate. It's quite curious. I mean, we know some of them, like possum and dog, they shake, right? Mm-hmm. Or like a gazelle, even after escaping a predator, will run for 2 or 3 miles and metabolize that trauma, right? Wow. And that's why I think exercise, for all of us, we always feel better. I mean, partially that's endorphin creation, but we're literally metabolizing the trauma and the stress right out of each other. Other primates groom each other. Have you ever seen like gorillas? Yeah. So we could try that. Groom you a little bit and pick little nits out of your sweater. Won't do that here. But wolves, that's why they howl as groups, to reestablish social homeostasis after a traumatic experience.
Wow.
So we could also do some howling after the podcast. Perfect. Too. We could get everyone to everyone in here into a howling exercise. You might get kicked out of the studio, but I don't know. But this is why, we have to recognize what's available to us as a human species. And, certainly crying is one. Activating conscious breath work that induces a parasympathetic state. Certainly meditation, actually being able to witness thoughts, emotions, feelings arise and subside in consciousness moment to moment without attaching to them. Just witnessing them appear and disappear without attaching any judgment to them. That's hard.
So hard.
Yeah. I mean, I categorize it now, that practice, as a good stress because it's wickedly hard to sit on your ass and do nothing.
Yeah.
And so this is why I think mindset, really, the ability to train your mind to move itself back to a state of equilibrium is maybe the most important protocol, because every experience of reality is perceived through the prism of our minds.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where that leads you.
What I would ask is, if Jeff Krasno still gets triggered today with all of your knowledge and wisdom, or you're having a deeply intense emotional experience like grief, loss, rage, I don't know what it would be, but like, how do you move through, like, what are your tools to move through or practices that intense emotion?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. Some of the most potent psychological tools that I have are actually physiological protocols. So obviously we associate fasting with many of the physiological benefits. And yes, there are many. It was central to my healing experience. I lost a ton of weight through an intermittent fasting protocol. That said, you don't necessarily lose weight with an intermittent fasting protocol, because you can still eat a lot of pizza in an 8-hour window. But generally, when you're making conscious decisions about your consumption of food, you're making other conscious decisions. And, I poked at a few of the other physiological benefits, autophagy and ketosis and metabolic flexibility and sirtuin pathways, etc. But when I started to adopt this 16-8 protocol, in which I consolidated all my consumption of food in an 8-hour window, it didn't mean that I didn't get hungry at 9 p.m., right? But because I became a disciple, I suppose, to that particular practice, I didn't mindlessly meander over to the larder every time I was hungry. I actually was forced to witness the nature of the hunger and untangle whether or not the origin of that hunger was a biological need or a psychological desire.
Yes.
And of course, with any degree of rigor, 99.99999% of the time, I was eating my feelings at 9 p.m. at night. There's enough warehoused fat on this organism to last for a good month.
I don't know if there really is. You're pretty thin.
But what I'm saying is that my hunger was not a biological need.
Right.
It was a result of, boredom, or maybe something wasn't going well at work, or someone insulted me on X or whatever. And so fasting, which is considered generally a physiological protocol, helped me to find the space, in the Viktor Frankl sense, between the stimulus, the hunger, and the response, sort of the mindless trip to the refrigerator. And in that space, there was a choice. And in that choice, yes, was my freedom and liberation, if I'm going to stay true to Frankl. But more, there was an opportunity to actually be honest with myself and have a more appropriate response to the stimulus. And that began to punctuate and spill over into other areas of my life.
Thank you for listening to the Heal with Kelly podcast. Be sure to tune in every Thursday for more empowering wisdom and inspiring healing stories. And make sure you hit the follow button on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, so you don't miss that one episode that holds the answer you've been searching for. Oh, and if you found this episode inspiring, please rate, review, and share Heal with Kelly so that we can grow our audience and reach more people. We truly appreciate it. Lots of love.